Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. The Basilisk is a creature of myth and legend. Accounts of it date back to a couple of thousand years almost. The legend is probably older, but there's a description in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, written around 79 AD, of a small serpent, no more than a couple of feet long, that is so venomous it poisons the ground it moves across, and even a gaze from it is lethal. According to the tale, the basilisk has one weakness, and that is the smell of a weasel, which could be thrown into the toxic nest of the monstrous reptile. Of course, we now know that this is a very sensational, super exaggerated depiction of the exotic king cobra and the mongoose, which the ancient Greeks had little personal experience with. In Greek, Basiliskos means little king, referring to being the king of all serpents, and the snake itself has a crown-like crest on its back. Back in the early days, there was no distinction between a basilisk and a cockatrice, and they were one and the same mythical animal. The development into the form of a monster we find today has included all sorts of craziness, including the idea that the basilisk is born from an egg laid by an old rooster, and that a golden substance can be created from a compound of powdered basilisk blood, powdered human blood, red copper, and a special kind of vinegar. The final form of this mythical basilisk is most accurately depicted in the film Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, being a large serpent that can turn living things to stone. However, in Dungeons & Dragons, the Basilisk has been in every edition of the game in a different form, and an early monster ecology article in Dragon magazine by Ed Greenwood provided some solid lore on the basic Basilisk, which has remained pretty much the same throughout the last 4 decades. However, there are many variations on the original form of the Basilisk, which we shall be taking a look at some of them in just a moment. They are reptiles, specifically large lizards, something that about the size of a Komodo dragon or larger. The Komodo dragon can grow up to 10 feet or 3 meters long and weigh around 150 pounds or 70 kilograms. Basilisks are 11 to 13 feet long and weigh 300 pounds on average, so even without their dreaded petrification power, they are formidable predators with a knack for ambushing their prey. Basilisks have a fearsome bite, which is +5 to hit and inflicts 2d6 plus 3 piercing damage thanks to rows of razor-sharp fangs, followed immediately by 2d6 poison damage, for which there is no saving throw for half damage, making it one of the most sought-after venoms for coating blades, arrows and darts, mainly due to the reputation of the basilisk itself, but it does tend to remain potent longer than most other similar forms of venoms. As mentioned, they are reptiles, so they're cold-blooded, but they store internal heat around their coiled digestive organs and remain active even at night time, but only in warmer climates. In the mornings, they'll be a bit more sluggish when the sun is yet to rise sufficiently. They tend to sun themselves on rocks or elevated places where they can lounge for hours just soaking up the heat. Basilisks spend a lot of their time virtually motionless, just conserving their energy, but when they sense that prey is around, particularly in areas where large prey is relatively sparse, such as the deserts where you quite often find them, they will seem to come alive and their behavior switches to a far more aggressive hunter mode. They have 8 legs, and similar to many lizards, they can regrow lost limbs, slowly over the course of up to 4 months. Alchemists know that the power of petrification only exists in the monstrously large versions of the basilisk. There are species which are simply venomous and do not have a petrifying gaze, but those that do seem to be able to do this magically. The eyes are particularly valuable in these true basilisks. Mages and alchemists have found 2 parts of their basilisk eye particularly useful: the internal pupil, the lens, and the fluid of the eye, which they use as an ingredient in potions, spell inks, and making of items concerned with petrifying creatures. And the inner membrane or eyelid of the creature are used in magic that protects against petrification. An intact eye, featuring all of those things, might bring as much as 1,000 gold pieces from an alchemist, or parts of it may be worth a little bit less, such as the eyelid or fluid, up to 400 gold pieces each. Prices vary, of course, based on your campaign setting, the edition that you're playing, and, of course, demand, with all of the rarities, and it's been known to reach as much as 10 times those amounts in places where basilisks are almost never heard of. but they've heard of their special properties, but only very rarely. And it is, as in many places, the alchemist or sage offered the basilisk, I will have no idea what to do with them, and will offer only, a few copper for them because they just don't know what they do. Basilisks are normally the same sort of colours and patterns as the terrain they inhabit, with spines or ridges along the back, a frill of horns or spikes at the back of the head, and sometimes a single spike rising from the tip of its snout, like some sort of lizard or unicorn. They sense smell via rasping their forked tongue along an olfactory organ in the top of their mouth, which is damp, so they taste the air, as it were, and they are able to possibly detect heat patterns. Their eyesight's reasonable, and they have a 60-foot dark vision with a passive perception of 9, which means if a character attempts to sneak past them and rolls a result lower than the 9, the basilisk will know where they are, or at least that they're there. Similarly, if the characters attempt to build a pit trap or a cage or a snare for the purpose of capturing a basilisk alive, it needs to be at least adequately concealed if such a trap has been used against that basilisk before. They have an IQ of 2, so their intelligence of 2 means that they're not completely stupid and are capable of remembering something they've previously identified as either a threat or food. This is a rudimentary basis of what an IQ of 2 represents. An IQ of 1 is just reacting to the same thing the same way every time, but 2 starts to build memory. They have no other definitions for non-basilisk things. It's either a threat or food. I suppose a safe place would also be something they know, as they will almost always have a hidey hole that they keep to sleep in during the day. So it could be a burrow in a desert environment, or they typically have a lair underground, and they stick close to water sources in subterranean environments. In cold night hours, when the weather is cooler, they tend to live in warmer climates only. In cold climates, there will be a variety of basilisks which is specifically adapted to a cold environment, but typically you don't find them there. Now, reading directly from Ed Greenwood's excellent ecology article from Dragon Magazine issue 81, published in January 1984, specifically pages 27 and 28. Basilisks instinctively avoid looking directly at other basilisks. I feel like I need to speak in Ed Greenwood's voice. And they never deliberately use their stoning gaze on one another. They recognize fellow basilisks by both sight and smell. And although their sense of smell is not noticeably keen in respect to hunting down other creatures, it's sufficiently accurate to distinguish between individual basilisks, i.e. mate and young, are readily discerned from strangers. Any basilisk encountered will be solitary hunters, a mated but hunting pair, a nesting pair, or a pair with grown but immature young still in the lair or thereabouts. Such young often accompany their parents for up to 3 seasons until they're ready to mate themselves, whereupon they leave their parents and each other to seek out their own mates and lairs. Basilisks mate for life and by instinct breed every 4 summers, usually in water or near water, which helps to support their slow, heavy bodies in this sort of ponderous and dangerous activity. 1 or 2 days after mating, the female lays a cluster of greenish-white eggs from 1 to 8, each about the size of a man's fist. Basilisks the eggs are soft, warm, stretchy, with a sort of a pliant surface, and they can withstand crowding or even gentle handling and tumbling without harm. They cannot break the way that a duck egg or a hen eggs will shatter in similar circumstances. They sort of just tear open. The basilisk parent often picks up an egg in its mouth to carry it gently and drops it in a new location or to defend itself, or rolls eggs about with its snout, moving them around to vary the temperature and stuff in the nest, all without doing the eggs any sort of damage. After laying its eggs, a basilisk mother covers them in cool sand or buries them in cool wet mud. The eggs are basilisk. The eggs are almost always about 95% chance fertile, and if they survive the nesting period of 4 to 6 weeks, or 31 to 50 days, they will hatch into miniature basilisks, about 4 to 9 inches long, who have the full gaze powers of their deadly parent at birth. During the nesting period, the parents don't eat, and all the while growing more and more irritable and fanatical in the defense of their nest and their surroundings. The closer they come to hearing those baby basilisks murmuring inside their eggs, they get very anxious. The hatchlings will grow quite rapidly, reaching man size in length from nose to tail in about 4 to 6 months after they're born. During their growth period, the parents hunt intensively with them for about as I said, another 3 seasons or so, 3 years. So you can imagine that the parents will be building up a larder of petrified food that the young will be eating on, and they will actually drag petrified victims back to their lair to provide a stock for the young to eat. The petrification gaze of a basilisk serves as the model for how this works in 5th edition D&D. So if a creature starts its turn within 30 feet of the basilisk, and the two of them can see each other, and that's significant because characters can protect themselves by simply not looking directly at the basilisk. But if you make eye contact to eye contact, the basilisk can force the creature to make a DC 12 Constitution saving throw if the basilisk isn't otherwise incapacitated. On a failed save, the creature magically begins to turn to stone and is restrained. Now you can imagine this is suddenly a very terrible feeling of the body turning solid. And I can't help but think that this would be very, very painful and also quite terrifying. The victim must then repeat the saving throw at the end of its next turn. On a success, the effect ends. A full movement is returned to the body, full vitality is restored, probably with a fair bit of pins and needles as the feeling of circulation returns. On a failure, the creature is petrified until freed by a greater restoration spell or other magic. They are turned to stone, or as near enough a stone-like substance as to be treated with the same physical properties as such. Mass doesn't increase. No details are provided exactly as to how hard and durable the stone form is, but it's certainly nowhere near as durable as granite or marble. Much lighter, even a sandstone is a bit tough. So I'm thinking technically here the body becomes some sort of dehydrated microlattice, which is actually highly porous. So much like pumice or a kind of a chalky substance. This means it would not be overly difficult to inflict the same sort of damage on it as if it were a body with the same number of hit points or less. A creature that isn't surprised can avert its eyes and avoid the saving throw at the start of its turn. If it does so, it can't see the basilisk until the start of its next turn, when it can avert its eyes again. If it looks at the basilisk in the meantime, it must immediately make a saving throw because the basilisk will definitely be looking at it. If the basilisk sees its reflection within 30 feet of it in bright light, it may mistake itself for a rival and target itself with its gaze. See, that actually is in conflict with the original description of its behavior. Basilisks do not deliberately turn other basilisks to stone. If your player characters can figure this out, they might be able to conceal themselves behind the illusionary image of another basilisk. That is not to say that they are not aggressive to each other. They will hiss and puff up and arch their spines in a threatening display. And don't forget, they have a very powerful bite and the ability to regrow limbs, so they may attempt to rush forward and tear the leg off a potential rival. But they also respond to the sense of smell. So if it doesn't smell like a basilisk, maybe that won't set them off at all, and they may regard it as prey. They typically lair close to a source of water, which means this may be because they eat the stone form of their victim, and then the chalky substance is revivified inside their gullet for digestion. This means that they might need to rehydrate their flesh again themselves, so require a lot of excess water built up inside themselves in storage capacity in order to revivify and digest their meals. This also means that the gullet can be alchemically processed and stuff extracted to create potions that return flesh from stone to a fleshy form. Although basilisks are usually thought of as one variety of monster, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few varieties. The stone-eye basilisk is the one that we have just been talking about. It's the most common true basilisk, the monstrous basilisk. However, they're all capable of petrifying their victim with their glare. Less famous variety that causes its victim to become poisoned rather than petrified is called the venom eye basilisk, and those were particularly prevalent in 4th edition D&D. There's also a larger, greater basilisk, which is a rare breed of the common basilisk, so the stone gaze basilisk. Similar in most respects, except it's larger, with a low intelligence and an evil disposition. So it's kind of like a dire basilisk, so a few more spikes on there somewhere. Gradually, greater basilisks are extremely nearsighted, and consequently the range of their petrification gaze was much shorter, so it could be as short as 10 to 15 feet. Like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content as well as full scripts to these videos. Buy some merchandise if you feel like wearing your geek with pride. Check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll be back with more for you in our countdown to completing the monster manual very soon.